Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I'm Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. We meet on the third Tuesdays of every month to celebrate the spoken word as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. We come with featured guests and an open mic, inviting readers of all ages. After gathering for several years at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library, since the pandemic, our thriving poetry circle has transitioned to this virtual space, and I'm grateful it allows me to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe, quite literally. Everyone in the house tonight, I'm so happy to see you all. Thanks for joining me and zooming in. And as tradition goes, I'd love to know where you are joining me from. So please share in the chat. And while you do that, let me share what's been on my mind. So I was reading the American poet and essayist Jane Hirshfield's essay on the topic of poetry, permeability, and healing. And what resonated deeply with me were these words by her, and I quote, "To be seated in full reality is to be seated also in permeability, interconnection, and compassion, the qualities of good poems. My experience then is that every truly good poem has in it somewhere an anchor dropped down into wholeness, findable even in poems in which that may be hard at first to see." And this was my inspiration, taking Jane Hirshfield's reflection on poetry, permeability, and healing as the theme to curate this poetry night. And what I wish to bring into our conversation is a sort of investigation and exploration of poetry's state of being permeable and how that leads us to a certain space of healing. Poetry forms its own language of interconnections that goes beyond words, offering us these handholds or footholds, as you may, as we try to make our way forward. It is not just about the letting go, but it is about the letting in, about the solace one could find through the recognition of grief or suffering, the wholeness one could find after understanding the brokenness, and the feeling of being connected to a larger humanity who has endured, which eventually allows us to be present for ourselves and perhaps then for others. And that to me is where you may see the power of processing and healing that poetry inherently holds. There are several poems I thought of opening this evening with, but this piece by Santa Cruz-based poet Ellen Bass struck a chord with me because of the subtle transformation it offers from tension to tenderness in a brief moment. Here's the poem. The thing is to love life, to love it even when you have no stomach for it, and everything you've held dear crumbles like burnt paper in your hands, your throat filled with the silt of it. When grief sits with you, its tropical heat thickening the air, heavy as water, more fit for gills than lungs. When grief weights you down like your own flesh, only more of it, an obesity of grief. You think, how can this body withstand this? Then you hold life, like a face between your palms, a plain face, no charming smile, no violet eyes. And you say, yes, I will take you. I will love you again. Thank you. Making meaning out of chaos is what all art is trying to do in some way, said Ellen Bass in one of her interviews. And I think in chaos, you can still find beauty. And one of the things that poetry does is to bear witness to the world as it is, to make the unbearable bearable, like this poem just did. And in this sense, going back to Hirschfield, poetry's work is preparatory, like the work of the earthworm in garden soil. This holistic approach to healing and to life through poetry is what you will hear and sense throughout this evening as well when you hear our featured poet for tonight, Zubair Ahmed. I am delighted to reconnect with him, to host him, and introduce him to you all. Zubair is a Bengali American poet and author of City of Rivers, published in the McSweeney's poetry series. He emigrated to the US in 2005 in his late teens through the Diversity Visa Program. His works have appeared in Poetry, Tin House, Ziziva, Poem a Day by the Academy of American Poets, among others. He lives and works in Portland, Oregon. There is so much more to this gracious poet beyond this short bio you just heard. And Zubair, we look forward to hearing all that you have to share with us tonight. So welcome and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Monica, for the good words and for that great introduction and introductory reading. It's an honor for me to be here tonight, so I really appreciate it. For tonight, I thought I would try something I've not tried before, which is pick up from where City of Rivers, my first book, left off, and do a bit of a tapestry through the next 11 years. And the book was written from 2009 to 2011. Those were the times in which the book came to being. And the first poem I have to share with you is from 2012. And from there, the last poem I have to share, which will be shared after the open mic, goes to this year, just last month. So this is the journey I wanted to prepare because I really related with the theme, permeability and healing. I feel poetry has helped me on that front quite a bit. And I really like the word permeability and the way Jane Hirschfield approached it. That was amazing. So I'll get started. The first poem is called Sleeping, Leaving. I view sleeping as a journey without my body, entering church deep inside the earth. I loosen my bones and their clothes of muscles. I'm sleeping in California. The land is afire with darkness. The highways twist like petrified snakes. This was the reflective, wide-eyed mode I found myself after the book manifested. And I thought it would be a good poem to start the night with. The next poem I have is also from 2012, and it's called Distant Cities Talk at Night. No one is around. The spirits inside the lampposts, the sewers, the curbs, the windows come to fill the air and hum melodies of the dead. They diffuse the streets like steam from the gutters. They press images onto my mind, working in furniture factories, drilling holes in the flesh of trees, wiping sweat with fingers of iron. No one to listen. people of the city like mannequins on beds of nails. So that was from 2012. And the next poem that I have to share leaps 2 years. It leaps into 2014. And like this, there will be several leaps over the years to get to the last poem. So this one is from 2014. This was an interesting year for me. There was a lot to look at. There was a lot to look at this year. And this poem is called Edges of Insomnia. Rising from my bed, I realize the night is young. My balcony offers a hand. I am a limbless man. Outside, trees and birds weep. Stars and trash cans sleep. A man befriends the darkness, strips naked, gives her his clothes. Rats grow their furs longer and longer until they become houses. The sea lists names of spirits who still hold regrets. A houseless teenager loses his mind to the great emptiness within us. Deer in the mountains dream of eating more than grass. A woman walks into the wind, carrying the book of 1,000 languages. You, in your light, become holy. Candles light your path to the mountains. Lying down on my bed, I explore the edges of insomnia. I roll a loaded dice. I'm done taking chances. That poem, I feel, captures 2014 accurately. It were difficult formative times, early 20s, and poetry helped me a lot when I was in that year to look at the deepest parts my being has access to and see what's going on there. This next poem is from 2015, so next year. And this year was a bit of a climax. I was like, this was the year in which I just felt all sorts of things just coming together, and all these wide rivers of experiences going into each other, springing out from each other. That's what 2015 felt like. And the poem I'm reading from this year is called Only the Ocean Can Repeat Itself. I am empty again after California with her sand had filled me to the shape of a lion. Moving away to this foreign town reduced me to the sound of a tin can rolling on the sidewalk with each small wind, making its way toward the end designed by men who in their long lives told to make these suburbs which drain everything abandoned to the nearby rivers. The year is irrelevant, and the crows here bear no mark of home. I've become so married to the lives of my past that I can no longer turn my wrist toward a stranger and say hello. So I drink away my time in this apartment, petting a cat who doesn't exist, stroking my beard, which was once a house of guests. I can see the sky more clearly now than I ever could, and for the first time, her blue is a blue like the blockage of blood. I inject myself with fear because all the other emotions have left me. Once again, I find myself looking for old patterns in a place where even the birds are new. I run my fingers across the dark lines of my joints. I am a failure, a human too thin for the wildfires of the Pacific. I am far away from where I belong, but I try to be someone who'll make you proud.
Wow. Thank you, Zubair. Those are really exquisite pieces that you opened the evening with. And
Thank you.
to that, to start off our conversation, uh, while ruminating on permeability and healing in poetry, I have been thinking of the idea of poetry as a practice. And to start off our conversation, I'd like to share what Mary Oliver says about uh, the practice of writing is that the process is not fully understood because we don't know what part of ourselves we use to write. And it's important to nourish whatever part of ourselves that is the writer, to let that part of ourselves know that the conscious self, so to say, is a reliable partner to the act of writing a poem. And to that, I feel
Mm.
uh, poetry is more than just practice, but an ongoing um, evolution of the relationship between the self and the written word, which is what I notice in your poetry. There is a sense of moving from one place to another. The opening lines of the first poem you shared, for instance, I view sleeping as a journey without my body. And what I see is that you write from a place of imagination, self awareness, growth, and progress. And your poetry contains multitudes. Having relocated from Dhaka, Bangladesh, to the States, being an engineer by profession with a taste for death metal in music, and as someone who's also studied Buddhism, talking about the idea of poetry as a practice. What is it like for you, and what kind of space do you inhabit through your writing practice?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That's a really good one. I feel like the main act that is happening while the poetry is being written, or even not when it's written, is the act of listening. Just listening, just staying quiet and listening to what's going on, or not even staying quiet, but still listening, paying attention to the phenomena all around us, and specifically the phenomena that happens within us, and the phenomena that others don't get to see unless we talk. There is a great depth there, and I find it almost impossible to not listen to it. I feel I've been listening to it since I was a kid. And when I corroborate, incidences with my parents, they affirm that, yep, it's just been like this since I came to this earth. So that listening, poetry helped me deepen that even more. And I find that space to be very close to, if not completely free. Like, it's a space that is entirely free. It's a space where nothing truly exists, and then something just begins to exist, maybe. And listening to that, there's nothing, but maybe there's a flower 20 miles away, and somehow that the fragrance of it got carried in the wind to my nose. Maybe. And to write from that space where one feels so free, where one waits and is patient, I found it to be incredibly healing. I found it to be very healing. It does something that I've noticed art does, which is once it's engaged and seen, it disappears. It never returns the same way again. It's just gone. But it's only gone because I respected it, because I looked at it, because I engaged with it, with the art of poetry. This applies, I
Right.
think, to other arts as well. I'm specifically talking about poetry here with the words. So, yeah, that's how I would say I relate to this art and how I practice it. The practice is the listening. And then what I hear is not up to me. It just happens. And then my job, if I were to say, as a poet, I have to put that in quotes because, yeah, it's not a job really. So my job would be to take what I've heard and put symbols on it. And the symbols here happen to be the English language with its 26 symbols and sentences and all sorts of stuff that goes along with the English language. So that's the practice for me. So to summarize, listen, be free, and just write without a sense of self.
Without a sense of self, I think that is such an important takeaway from what you just said, Zubair. I think it's a beautiful perspective that you just shared about the art form disappearing after you engage with it, and it never returns in the same way. That is very true as well. Thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that,
thanks.
Zubair.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely. Thanks for a great question.
if you'd like to read a couple more poems and then we take another question.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good.
Thank you.
This next one I will read is also from 2015, and this poem is called Deep Winter. I rest on a bed of snow. The trees needle the horizon. A crow slices the sky. I open the eyes in my chest. Thousands of snakes rise like flowers from the earth. Where is the temple for their venom to begin my cure? The next poem I have for everyone is from the next year, 2016. And this poem is about finding a real friend. Finding a real friend. and it's called Friend and Afterthought. 1. He feels like a voice that comes from the storm, as clear as light. I find myself listening to him as I would listen to someone who holds the key to the great lock inside me. A distant shadow on a background of light. There are mountains of light with valleys and rivers of light. He is a shadow here. Even with this distance, I can see him. The focus of my walk across this landscape of light is to meet a small shadow I call my friend. 2. I become a shoebox by a gas station. No one can see me. Do I exist here? Only here? I wait for an answer.
Those were really fantastic pieces, Zubair. Thank you. Just taking in the lines that came across and that really stayed with me. The one that says, the focus of my walk across this landscape of light is this small shadow I call my friend. And we always have that friend with us, but I love the way the line begins with the focus of my walk across this landscape of light. And very existential questions that you ask as the poem moves forward, turning into a shoebox and asking, do I exist here? No one is able to see you. I think those are so central to questions, so central to who we are and where we are and why are we here. I think we need to interact with our environment, however harsh it is, not escape in order to be aware and find ways of understanding it through our present troubles or crisis. And it's crucial, I think, to that we develop this vision in our lives, this constant awareness of things happening on the periphery of the circle, like the edges of insomnia also tells us. And I was reading the Iranian American poet Kaveh Akbar, who says that uh, that a permeability to wonder is the root of every great artist. But I feel that facing this broken world is not easy. So the wonder and the awe that we want to experience from life is not as easily uh, coming to us. What role does your own vulnerability or permeability perhaps play in your poems?
Yeah. That's a beautiful quote, by the way, by the Iranian poet. I really resonate with that. Yeah. I, yeah, before coming into this event, didn't look at the word permeability and vulnerability side by side before. And I was very curious about that because I, I've heard from readers of my poetry who said, "Oh, you're being very vulnerable in your poems." I've never felt that way, but I absolutely feel permeable. I feel something just flowing through. I don't have to do anything to it. It's already what it is, and it's already going where it's trying to go. there's no interference at all. Vulnerability, on the other hand, makes me feel like there is at the center of it a person who could be hurt. And I don't relate to that, not in the scope of poetry. It There is no person here writing poetry. Like, that's just not what's going on. So just seeing those words side by side made me realize that. And being permeable opens up everything. Like, there's nothing that is closed off anymore, because whatever comes will seep, and the seeping will be looked at. And that looking at, that's the poem. That looking at is the poem. That looking at somehow becomes words, and that somehow becomes something like a sentence, and then that becomes two sentences.
Mm.
And as long as the permeability or whatever is going on in the moment of the writing is still happening, one can keep on writing. And that's something that I definitely encourage everybody to do too if they're writing. Like, just keep on going. Don't stop, even though like the poem might feel like it's over. Yeah.
I also see
So
there is a lot of spirituality connected in the words that you're making, the lyric that comes across. We hear the words as well: resurrection, church. I think the priest. Those words that we hear. I think does spirituality also weave into this permeability that you're talking about?
I would say so. So I've had a very long religious journey, and yeah, I've wondered. The first thought I remember having was when I was 2 years old, and I looked at my mother, and my thought was, does she actually exist? This is a 2-year-old. I remember this because this was my first thought ever. And as you can tell, if that was 2 years old, there were probably more thoughts like that followed. And yes, there was, yes, lots of thoughts like that. And a lot of that shows up in the poetry. And the end of that journey for me is spirituality, like religion slowly transformed into spirituality, and spirituality slowly transformed into I just live like this. And this poem, the one that you're talking about, was from 2016. A lot of transformation has happened since then. And absolutely, spirituality plays a huge role into it. Mostly because I saw, thanks to this friend actually, the friend who is part of this poem, who is the subject of the poem, he brought to my attention that there exists an immutable layer of peace. Very fascinating. I was like, all right, let's look for this thing. If it exists, I can find it. So yeah, in short, I'm wondering, there's so many threads and tangents here, very fascinating, all of them fascinating to me. I'm wondering where to go, but that would be a nice like a appetizer for this type of a conversation where religious and spirituality meet poetry. Lots of thoughts in that space for me, for sure.
True, for sure. And the reason why the Iranian American poet Kaveh Akbar's quote resonated with me while I was just researching on our for our poetry night tonight is because in your poetry as well, I think that is what reflects deeply and comes through. That there is so much wonder that it exhibits. And the imagery that you use also to showcase that wonder, it's very unique, like the woman walking with a book of in thousand languages, or you talk about the deer dreaming of eating something more than grass. I'm just uh, uh, trying to recall the lines here, not in exact quotes about that. Excuse me for that, but just to give our audience an idea, and so that they are able to revisit those images that you shared about the shoebox, for example, transforming into a shoebox. Those are, I think, really leading to this idea of wonder in poetry, which is so important, I think, when you want to move forward and look for uh, interesting in places that you want to go to. And I think that is what I love in your poetry, the mystery and the enigma that they hold. It really comes through. So yeah, thank you for sharing those, Zubair. Would love to hear the next couple poems that you have to offer.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that. And I would just like to note, yeah, wonder is absolutely one of my favorite words. I will throw awe in there as well. They're all around us, which is the best. Like all around us, no matter what is going on in the human world. I'm going to make a distinction between the human world and the non-human world, quote unquote, because we're also part of that world. But just for the sake of conversation, the distinction between the human world and the non-human world. The non-human world is absolutely dripping with wonder and awe. Absolutely dripping. You don't even have to go anywhere. You just have to open your front door and maybe look in the corner of the door. Maybe there's something living there. Maybe it's
Yeah,
beautiful. Maybe it's something you've never seen before. This is a small example. So yeah, I really relate to that. So thanks for introducing that beautiful quote into my life.
thank you.
The next poem that I will read is from 2017. This year started a turn. Something started to turn in a fascinating and new way. And this poem is called Semicolons. Forgive me, I say to the wall. My life is paper. My jaws rust. Wanderer, singing. The sky is my home. I throw roses into it to color it red. Stop. These roads grow from me. My journey must end because my destinations have ended. Kneeling like a priest, seeing the spherical eyes of flies, my wish, emptiness and sudden light. Resurrection, I am dead from it. The attempt to live again. It sings as me when I sleep. The world dressed in yellow. Never have songs meant for me what they do when you sing. I leave you, halos and clothes. I leave you violently, like the wail of an exile. Forget me, my truth. My masterpiece is my non-existence. Sunrise, unbreakable dawn. I open your book. It has no pages. Keeping on climbing with the years, the next poem I have is from 2018. And when this poem came, I was surprised. It's like, oh, this is cool. This is something that hasn't been here before. This poem is called Red with a Touch of Sulfur. Isn't it funny when suddenly, after all these decades, you notice a new part of your body? Maybe the hamstrings, entirely unused when lifting weights, back used instead, which then pains for years. Maybe the slight shoulder raise that tightens those muscles, maybe for good. I notice my body slide through time. It is odd and peculiar, genius of no one, a perfect clock, making clocks look simple. Newness comes naturally. Resisting it causes the past to present memories on yellow platters. My age is a number, bones getting ready to play poker. I will remain a small book, hidden away deep in the library. I love my body and this world. Such a declaration 5 years ago would have driven me insane. But now an appreciation arrives with a fine taste of sulfur, and anywhere I look is born a rose.
Wow, really fascinating, Zubair. And Red with a Touch of Sulfur was one of the first poems, I think, that I came across, of course, on the Academy of American Poets page. So I'm really happy that you picked that piece as well to share with us tonight. And even the previous piece that you shared, so many of the lines have resonated with our audience members. I'd just like to point them out to you. Carolyn Callipy writes, spherical eyes of flies. Lois Freed says, the world is dressed in yellow. And Finn Bell says, quotes, my masterpiece is my non-existence. Wow, what a line that. And to that, coming to the craft of it, most of the poems you have written and some of that we've heard from you tonight are composed of very short lines, but they also make large poetic leaps. I'm also thinking of a few other poems you have written. I'm not sure if you'll be sharing some of those as well, but I have read them. My ghost sits in a chair near the Jamuna River is one, and Red with a Touch of Sulfur is another. I eat breakfast to begin the day, another of the poems that I came across, I think on Poetry Foundation or something. Can you talk about the relationship between the economy of the line and associational leaps in these poems? Because I see there is a sort of tension and permeability even in the line breaks or stanza breaks with those enjammed lines that you are creating. So yeah, I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, for sure. I hmm, I really like simplicity and density, and those might be the origins of the short lines. I When I was just learning how to write poetry, my lines were significantly longer, and they were full of adverbs and adjectives and all sorts of tiny descriptive stuff. It also rhymed. My poetry no longer rhymes, as is most likely obvious. So that was how I started, and there was a lot of listening to the sound of a line. There was a lot of that going on. And when I was listening to it, I started to discover there's a specific type of sound that I intuitively enjoy. I just started to notice that after writing for a lot of poems, like probably thousands of poems, I started to notice that. And because I enjoy density and I enjoy simplicity, and the fact that my mind has this like if you imagine, how will I communicate this? If you imagine, like, I'll just use a pond. Imagine a pond, and then you have a flashlight, like just 2 feet above the pond. You can just see a little bit of the pond, right? That's cool. My flashlight feels like attention, feels like it's very high up, or like it kind of lands a soft light on not only the pond, what's around the pond, maybe the forest around the pond. It feels like this soft, very big, wide attention. That's probably the best way I can describe it. And this is happening all the time with me. Like, it's going on right now. This is just how my attention is. And because my attention is of that quality, when I go from one line to another, I could have gone from this wide focus to an entirely another very wide focus. And they are always related in the essence of the poem that's coming. However, the relationship may be mysterious. And I like to keep it mysterious personally, but I've gotten feedback in workshops to try to connect more of the dots. And I'm happy to do that. Both are fine. Whatever makes the poem breathe the best in the world, I'm all for that. So that's how I would say it. Like, I love for simplicity, a love for density, and just having this focus that is not that specific. Like, I probably spend most of my day absolutely zoned out, staring into space. Like, that's most likely like 70 to 80% of my day, and the rest of the day is talking to people, doing a job, paying bills. So because of the way these things happen in my perception, and specifically because of that discovery of that sound of a line, I didn't really understand how music and poetry are just so linked. I'm still trying to understand how what's going on there. So this is an exploration for the near future. But because of these things, I would say that's why my lines show up short. And maybe if it came out and I was able to listen to it with my full attention, complete. As a result, also dense. So I think that gives a little bit of insight into where these things are coming from. And they're all just straight intuition and style. So no necessary logical, nothing logical happened here. I just felt it, I liked it, and I just started like pulling it out. And it just keep on coming out, and everything that comes out are short lines. It changes every now and then. I do have poems where I have a poem that's just one line, and the line is really long. It goes into 3 pages actually, just one line. And so it every now and then the poetry spirit or whatever is coming through just shakes things up. And it's like, hey, something different here. Look at this thing now. And as a poet, I do look at it and just see what's there.
Well, I think that is quite a skill, and it seems you've with practice honed the skill of keeping your attention so expansive, at the same time being able to really focus or zero in into those internal spaces as well, where thoughts exist, or where a very intimate ideas exist. So it's quite remarkable, Zubair. And before I take another question for you, I'd love to hear maybe another poem from you before we jump onto that.
Sure, that sounds good. The next poem I have is, I skipped 2019 and I went to 2020. And this poem is called In the Middle of a Nameless City. Streets crowd with umbrellas as the rain falls like small spirits. The bus is late. Cars drive by so fast they sound as if their time is up. A man beside me curses into his phone. He says he won't make it in time. He won't make it in time. The child will have to be born without him. My eyes glaze. My clothes wet from sideways rain. The traffic light flickers an unusual rhythm. The beginning of a new order. A loud sound cracks the air. A forest rises through the concrete. A mature forest is bursting from godly seeds. People rejoice like I've never seen them. A happiness comes more surreal than this acceleration of life. Humans of all types, they fall dead from joy.
What a
The
great piece
next
that.
poem.
Would
Oh,
you
thank you.
like to read another one or take the question first?
How about, let's see. Yeah, question is good.
Okay, all right. From our last conversation, something that you said stayed with me is that a tree doesn't become magnificent in a day. And it is such an important reminder as we make room for healing, I think, which is also at the core of poetry. In this context, you've mentioned the process of creating, editing, sharing as a way of completing the circle. Uh, now, that is an intimately healing way to look at this art form. And I'd like to know, how does poetry help you process things or arrive at truths that might otherwise feel out of reach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I almost feel the design of poetry is to be able to get to things that are out of reach. I've noticed poetry lives in a space for me where nothing else is. And what I mean by that is there are feelings that exquisitely only exist in poetry. Like if I try to take that feeling and bring it into average conversation, it just won't, it wouldn't make any sense. Um, Obviously, with these feelings come a language that I can't use in everyday language, everyday speak. So I find it expanding when I'm able to both reach into that space and then share it. And I've noticed there is many different types of sharing. Like one is sharing with the world, which is full of strangers, no faces. One is sharing with friends, obviously you know them. And there are others sharing in workshops or sharing in other context. So there's a lot of ways I see to complete the circle. And the most important thing for me is to begin the circle, like to start the creating. And to start that creating, I do look at those things. Like as far as like arriving at truths with poetry, I'm really curious about that because right now what I can say is like I don't think words can reach the truth. I really don't think so. I tried that. That was actually the last 3 years of my poetry, trying to use poetry to communicate truths. And I discovered poetry at best can circle around it and make it a dance. and make it some type of a story, maybe make it anything goes. But I noticed like it does struggle communicating that perfect emptiness, that perfection. So that I find very curious. I was very curious to reach these conclusions as I wrote over the last 3 years. Yeah, so I guess for this entire time I've been reaching into what feels like out of reach with poetry. And the best thing I feel is it is an infinite space. I will forever be feeling things that I cannot bring into daily speak. And that is the space for poetry. So I can't just bring it in anywhere with friends, strangers. It just doesn't fit into anything I could say or be in these situations. So that makes me feel great that there are things like this that exist because it expands that circle, the edges of the circle, and it forever keeps on growing or transforming. The circle could transform into a helix, which could transform into anything else. Without getting into shapes, I feel an expansion. So when I complete this circle, the circle grows. When I complete the circle, things start to happen that just appear like hard to explain. Like things in everyday life. It's like, oh, whoa, that's cool, that's nice. And the best part about it is it's all under the umbrella of healing, growth, and evolution. So it literally enriches life, like completing the circle. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I love that, the way you have processed that thought and that concept of completing the circle. Thanks, Zubair, for sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much for the great question.
All right, before my last question now, my final question to you, I'd love to hear a couple more poems that you have prepared for us.
For sure. I'll get into the next one. So the last one was from 2020. This one is from 2021. And this started the birth of another branch of exploration that beautifully matches the theme of permeability and healing. I think this theme like pretty much captures like my entire body of work, which is really amazing. This piece is called Ancestors. I listen to spaces where ancestors share what can't be put to words. I feel calm shadows as the sky slowly turns. I wonder what they're engaging. These threads of a clothing dressing beyond understanding. Could they be trying to reach us only to find us too busy? Are they doing the work we call love? Suddenly, I'm in a world abstract. Here, the knowledge is quiet. I dance awake, the clear lake in me.
Oh, that has a
And this,
very tranquil, feel to it, that piece.
oh, awesome. Yeah, that's really cool that that came through. Yes, that's what I was feeling when I was writing that. It felt very peaceful. Yeah, I think that's like the prime feeling of the my works over the last 3 years. They just feel peaceful to me personally, and also
Right.
tranquil and serene. And looking at things, been a total transformation. So this is the newer works.
Absolutely. It does capture the serenity in that piece.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. I have two more poems and then one for the end of the open mic. So
Sure.
I will continue on to the next one. The next one is from 2022, and I wanted in this poem to capture the essence of what I feel when I'm feeling introverted. So this is called Introversion. Alone in the spacious black, I sigh my sorrow into an owl. I pull music out of the void to keep me company. Notes of thought matter stringing themselves into light. Then gone. I'm back alone. No effort enough to sustain. No yearning stronger than oblivion. And then the last poem I have to share, this poem marked a very fascinating new phenomena for me, which is where I had a say in the topic of the poem. Like, I usually don't feel like that. Like usually I'm just writing and things are coming out and somehow there's coherency and I trust. This one, I was like, yo, I'm gonna try something. And I was able to nudge, so to say, the poetic spirit in a certain way. It was very interesting, something different. This one's called The Sunbird, and it's from 2023, this year. Hopelessness, the great defeater. My sight waddles the river it makes. No sky, no bank. The torrent, the substance of powder mixed with the vial. This is all I see, this tunnel swirling, testing, pushing to limits the walls of sanity. But then, a tree with one branch. A bird, the color of sun, perched. Its eyes, the density of a black hole. And without warning, a song, piercing and mighty, everything ringing in resonance, and a gaze from those eyes. That's all I have for this section.
Well, thank you so much, Zubair. But before we close the featured segment, I do have a final question, circling back to the idea of wholeness. The way you enter your poems, you've already mentioned this, with attention and intention. I also see that you enter it with fear, but with new awareness and reconciliation, with imaginative leaps. To attune oneself to this permeability that poetry offers. Can you share an exercise with our listeners that they might use as they either draft or revise one of their own poems?
For sure. I alluded to something that I would recommend uh, for writers to do, which is just never stop. Like when something is being written, just keep at it without any kind of filtering. I think filtering or the editing, the editor, I think, unfortunately, ruins a lot of creativity. So no editor, write as much as you can. And after something's there, a curious exercise that I really enjoy personally, and I'm still honing, is where does the poem actually begin and where does the poem actually end? I wonder about this quite a bit. And so specifically, I would share this. And of course, there's the age-old editing tools like mush, take the stanza above the stanza, put the stanza behind the stanza, remove adjectives and adverbs. It's not a necessity, but it's maybe like a kind of a rule of thumb to see what happens kind of thing. But really, like, I think the most important thing is when a poem is here and you sense it, or when a feeling is here and you sense it, or when you're like, I'm going to write something and you feel that way, I think it's really important to not stop. I think it's really important, just keep going. Just write anything, it doesn't matter. Like, just write. Just write. No editor. All of my works have come from this space. So I really strongly believe in this. So yeah, and then like I said, like sometimes I notice my poem begins in the second stanza. I notice this more often than not because I think, you know how before you exercise you need to warm up, stretch and stuff? Same thing happens with poetry. Notice like a poem when it's just starting to come out, it's like, cold, it needs to be warmed up a little, put by the fire a little bit, get a little warm. And then the poem actually starts to sing. So I've noticed that happen. Not always, but it's interesting to keep an awareness on it. These are the things I would offer.
Thank you, Zubair. That's fantastic advice, I think. And just write, no editing. I love that. That is definitely my takeaway from tonight. And just, I'm so grateful for all that you've offered tonight and such searingly beautiful poetry and such an enigmatic conversation. Thank you so much again for being here and making us this rich offering.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a true pleasure.
I will open the floor up briefly for questions. Any comments from the audience before we close the segment? So I encourage you to unmute. And while you do that, I'll put a link to Zubair's work in the chat.
I can hear you. Oh.
Zubair, I don't have a question. I just wanted to, this is Lois, and I put it in the chat, but I just wanted to let you know that it was just a pleasure to listen to you read your poems tonight. And I was a bit anxious when I joined the session tonight, and your reading just relaxed me immensely. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for listening.
Zubair, I had one question, and thank you for the just fantastic, your fantastic poetry. I was really taken with your voice and your reading style, and I was wondering if that's something you've developed over the years or practiced at or you're conscious of. It's, as somebody mentioned, it's very soothing, it's very effective. It's both soothing and quite dramatic. It elevates the material, I believe. Is that something you've worked on, or it comes natural, or what?
Yeah, it's a great note. I haven't worked on it, so it must be natural. And I approach it by allowing the space to breathe. And I just pay attention to that breath. And most of it is space. So I just pay attention to that. And every now and then inside the space is a sentence. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for those good words. Appreciate it.
I think, Leo, you have your hand raised.
Is anybody else hearing an echo, by the way? I hear a little bit of an echo.
I do hear an echo as well. I think most of us do tonight.
I see. Okay, cool.
Very poetic.
My question was, I get the sense as you read poetry, you talk about it, and your pace and a lot of what you said, I get this sense of meditation. So I'm wondering if you're a meditator.
Oh, sorry, what was that last thing? I wonder if
you regularly practice meditation, if you're like a meditator.
Right. Yes, I'm a very strong proponent of meditating, and this is a rich topic, so I'll summarize by saying yes, I meditate very regularly. I don't know, should I say more about that, or?
All right, then thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts and comments in the chat as well. I'm sure Zubair will be looking at those in a while. And Zubair, thank you again for your time. It was an absolute pleasure to host you and hold this conversation tonight.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's a real honor to be here, and it was a true pleasure.
Yeah, I hope it has brought you much joy as well. And I'll invite you at the end of our open mic segment for a closing poem. But for now, you can just relax and enjoy the rest of the evening.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right. With that, we are going to stop recording this segment. Those of you who are in the Zoom room, please stay online for the open mic segment of the evening. To the YouTube audience, thanks for joining in and hope to see you for our next month's virtual Belmont Poetry Night. Good night.